Lexi, I've been meaning to talk to you about how you could be a better friend.
I can't wait to hear more, Mel.
I need you to first watch the podcast more.
I like to binge watch things, so I'm saving them.
Second of all, I need you to go on your phone and vote for us for the Webbies. And I want you to do it right now because we're going to show everybody how quick it is. Go to vote.webbyawards.com.
Hold on, slow down. Oops, I just got to close that browser. Vote.webbyawards.com.
And go to the category of podcasts,
limited
series and specials, and go to the category diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Yes, that's it.
I got it right
and
here.
And vote for Made It Out.
While I sign up to vote, can you tell me a little bit more about what this award means to you?
Yes, the Webbies are the best of the internet, and we really would like to win just because it would open up so many doors for us. It would help us make more gay content and spread the gay agenda.
That's awesome. Well, just so you know, I've completed that.
Okay, and don't forget to verify your email address after, because your vote doesn't count if you don't. Okay, thank you. We'll keep working on this friendship.
For sure. I didn't realize our friendship was so transactional, but always happy to help.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Made It Out. Today I am speaking to former basketball player, former ESPN journalist, and brand new author, Kate Fagan. This episode is all about sports, and even if you're not a sports fan, it is so good. I learned so much. We talk about why women's sports are on the rise right now, some of the inequalities in women's sports, also gender norms and gender expression in women's sports, coming out when she was deeply entrenched in the world of sports. So there's something for everyone in this episode. I know you're going to enjoy it. Here we go. I recently had a guest come on here and tell me that I need to stop being on my parents' cell phone plan and start paying my own. So recently I've been paying more attention to just prices out in the cell phone ether. And y'all, these big wireless companies charge so much, but Mint Mobile is here to rescue with premium wireless plans starting at just $15 a month. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/made. That's mintmobile.com/made. Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months for 5 gigabytes, required equivalent to $15 per month. New customer offer for 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. All right. Are we ready?
We're ready to go.
Perfect. Since we were already starting our interview before.
We did it already, yeah.
I'm really excited to talk to you. You have such an interesting past, such an interesting story. You played basketball at a very high level. And then you went into sports journalism, and then you became an author. And that does very much feel like
yes,
just constantly pursuing things. I want to talk a little bit about the journalism side first. And why did you go that way? What was it like coming into that culture as a gay woman? Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah. So I got into journalism, and specifically sports journalism, when I was done playing basketball, simply as a way to learn how to write. I would have loved to stop playing basketball and just sat down in a room and written fiction, but I didn't know anything but basketball. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get into sports journalism. And I feel like I was really lucky about when both I played basketball and then when I was first working in sports journalism, because there was just not the feedback loop that there is today, in that I did not grow up thinking really that women's sports were treated inferiorly. The evidence around me, my dad was into me playing, we would go on AAU tournaments and all the parents were super into it. Nobody in my world was giving me feedback that I was less important to the general whole.
Right.
And I couldn't go anywhere else. I mean, there was seriously just newspapers and TV, and women's sports wasn't on TV. So I guess if I was really astute, I could have been well, there's no female athletes I have a poster of. I mean, I'd have to really think about these things, but no one was saying it to me.
Right.
And then it wasn't until I got to ESPN that I really started to see clearly how women's sports were treated. And that was around the time when I came out. And I feel like at that point I was like, oh, maybe I could like be helpful in some way in trying to change some of that dynamic. Yeah.
When did you finally decide to come out?
Fully come out? Mm-hmm. Well, so I'd come out when I was playing college basketball, and we can dive into this, but like the energy there was not, you should be open and out. It was like, cool. If you want to date women privately, great. But you're not going to talk about that in public.
Yeah.
So that's how I moved forward in the world until I was 30.
Wow.
My hair was longer. It was a different vibe. So I was at the Philadelphia Inquirer, a newspaper in Philly, and I was covering the Sixers, but I had met somebody at ESPN and I had pitched them on a story about recruiting in women's basketball. It was like about negative recruiting in women's basketball. Because I had heard all these whisper campaigns about how male head coaches would use phrases to negatively recruit against women. And so I had pitched them this kind of long form story on that. And again, here I'm kind of closeted, but I'm looking for a way to come out, because at the time, and this was like 2000, maybe 10, 11, in women's college basketball Division I, there's around 350 teams, probably more now. And at the time there was 0 out female coaches.
Oh my
0.
God.
And it's about 50-50. So you're talking about 180. Actually, you can add in assistant coaches here. 0 of them are out. And so it just was like, it was a different climate.
Right.
Entirely.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many media guides I would go through, and it would like by the end of the head coach, the end of the bio would be like, you know, Jane lives in Stockbridge with her 3 boxers and is a follower of Christ. Like seriously, like these are, I mean, maybe they were religious, but even if they were living with a woman. So that's kind of, the story was about all of that energy. And when I was pitching it to ESPN, I walked into their editorial room, and, you know, there was like 6 to 8 of us, and there was a woman there, and she was the executive editor. And at the end of the meeting, she was like, I love, we're going to do like a lesbo story. And then she looked around and she was like, and I can say that because I'm a big old lesbian. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
She's saying this out loud to people. And she didn't come from women's sports. So she didn't have all of the, it's just a deep internalized baggage of women's sports. Like it is just, people do not understand unless they're in that world, the depth of it. And so when she said that, I was like, I pulled her aside and I was like, so you just said that out loud to everybody? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, I kind of made her my little mini mentor.
Yeah.
And that was right around the time when Michael Sam, sorry to get sportsy, but like he was an NFL prospect who had come out as gay and then was drafted, and then ESPN showed it. And I wrote a column about being queer in sports. And that was kind of my first public thing that I had done.
Wow.
Yeah.
That had to be so loaded.
Yeah.
Putting that out.
Yeah. Well, it's loaded in women's sports in particular because everyone acts like everybody's a lesbian in women's sports. But nobody in women's sports until recently has actually talked about being a lesbian.
Right.
So you've got this strange dynamic where people think, well, how hard was that for you? Well, you're a lesbian in women's sports. Duh. And I'm like, it's just a weird thing where you're like, okay, so when men come out, they're like shattering a stereotype. But if you're a female athlete and you've been growing up in the climate of like, you don't want to be a lesbian because everybody's a lesbian, like reinforcing a stereotype that in culture has had a negative connotation for sports, for women's sports, like also very challenging. Yeah. So there was a whole lot. As you can hear in my voice, I don't know that I've processed all of the women's sports trauma in my life.
It's so interesting though, because I've never really heard this perspective, but because of that, I want to go back a little bit. When you were growing up playing sports, what did you hear a lot of these things, or did you? Yeah. What was the climate then?
Okay, so there's 2 key things for me when I was growing up. One was when I was at a little AAU tournament. I'm like a little 13-year-old. And at that point in my mind, I'm like, I feel like I've had something that feels like feelings for another girl, but I don't know. Maybe everybody feels that way, kind of thing. And then I remember one particular tournament, you know, we're in our little group, my AAU team, and we're like in between games. And then another team walked by and my teammates started hitting each other, and they pointed at a specific girl, and then they all started whispering, and they're like, I heard she's a big old dyke.
Oh no.
And I was like, okay, well, messaging to me being like, that is obviously not a thing I'm going to be.
Yeah.
And then there was another, which was Saturday Night Live, which I adore, but I wouldn't say they've done the best skits in their life about women's sports. And they did one in the 90s that was called the Women's Coaches Fashion Show.
Oh no.
And it was like Tara Vanderveer, like the former Stanford coach, in khakis and penny loafers with like a polo, right? And it was just like a parade of short-haired women
Yeah.
in khakis.
Yeah.
And my dad and mom, and my dad in particular, I think, was like, you know, oh yeah, just big old lesbos and women's sport. Like he said something to that effect, thinking he was being funny.
Yeah.
And these are the two like foundational moments that were like my messaging then is like, this is not something that I should be in women's sports. Meanwhile, everybody, you know, what?
Yes.
Somebody make it make sense.
Yes. Yes. So what is that like then, that gap in... It's like a cognitive dissonance or something.
Yeah, and then like I think so another story I had pitched them, but we never kind of got around to writing it, was called the Two Closets, because a lot of college coaches I knew as I got older had two closets. They had like the clothes they would wear for their professional lives, and then the clothes they would wear for their personal life, or like, you know, so like you said, the cognitive dissonance was just like. Just the relentless messaging, coming up in all of that, and then going to college, and even on my recruiting visit, one of the players who was already there was like, I don't think my coach, who I'm really close to still, who is out and married to her wife now, would mind this, but just like that player being like, well, we did hear Coach Barry's a lesbian. You know, and me just like kind of not, again, bad feelings.
Yeah.
But not enough to make me not go. I didn't go because of that, but I didn't not go because of that.
Yeah.
But like, and then you witness these older women who you adore and are your mentors never talking about it.
Yeah.
Never. I mean, Coach Barry didn't bring any of her girlfriends at any point to any function.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so like... That's how I thought life had to be.
Right. You're witnessing them be ashamed. So then you feel like you have to be ashamed. Yeah. So this one editor, you're like,
yes,
thank fucking God.
Like no one had ever said that in my life. No one had ever said they were a lesbian with any connotation except whisper shame in my life.
Isn't that amazing what that does?
I mean, I still, like, if I say the word lesbian, there's still like a percentage of me that is still like, is that the word that we need to use?
Yeah. I mean, that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did you start to watch that change in your career in sports and just in the world?
I feel like I guess my feeling, the way I watched it was always through the sports lens. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so for me, it was right after that was Brittany Griner was playing at, is it okay that we're like going this sportsy?
Let's go.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. People are going to love this. I'm just not that sportsy. So
right.
I'm just, if these are dumb questions.
No. You're rocking it. You're rocking it. So like the next kind of iteration was watching Brittany Griner at Baylor and she was not allowed to be out at Baylor, but you're like, you know, I'm covering Baylor. I have fucking eyes, you know, and I'm like, okay, so here we have the number 1 draft pick in the WNBA. Like, but she's not talking about this at Baylor, but the second she was drafted, it was like game on, right? She was out, she was talking about it. And so that was like the first thing. But also Brittany Griner at that time, and then everything happening with Russia later, but like could be a little bit of a divisive figure. And so I was still like, okay, that's like one step.
Right.
And then Abby Wambach came out. Mm-hmm. You know, so like you could we're waiting for that. Yeah. And then women's soccer came into the mix. Yeah. Because I think that you have a lot of distinction within women's sports. Mm-hmm. Like there's team sports, which have their own dynamic about how they're treated and how we look at the women. And then you have solo sports. And like a tennis or a gymnastics or any of that, a female athlete is like way more able to break through.
Interesting.
Whereas a team sport, there's just so much the culture within, and there's so much comparison to the men's sport version of it.
And that's what makes it harder to kind of exist.
No, those are like, I'm just kind of separating them out.
Okay.
And then within team sports, you've got basketball that has a much, much more Black culture. It's
Okay.
different demographics. Definitely, it's coming from street culture. So you've got strikes against you from like mainstream.
Okay.
Whereas women's soccer, up until these moments I'm talking about, were very girl next door vibes. Right, like the Mia Hamm, the Julie Foudy. Other than like Brianna Scurry, who's playing keeper for them, you're talking about an all-white team that is very girl next door. Nobody's out.
Okay.
And so basketball is a hard world for many reasons, because like just the visual culture of it, like you're wearing baggier shorts, there's a little bit more of a street swagger culture vibe. And then there's also just the inherent racism that comes with all of these things. So when women's soccer started coming into the mix, like now you got Megan Rapinoe, and way late to the party, you got Tobin Heath and Kristen Pratt, like it just started to, I think, introduce the idea to more parents who were like, oh, well, these are our, 8-10 years ago, we could have said, oh, well, just Abby Wambach. Well, you still got the rest of the team. And now you're like, well, if my girl loves soccer, I kind of got to reconcile that this is like part of what loving the national team is.
Yeah.
And I think that was very helpful for all of us.
I recently had a guest come on here and tell me that I need to stop being on my parents' cell phone plan and start paying my own. So recently I've been paying more attention to just prices out in the cell phone ether. And y'all, these big wireless companies charge so much. But Mint Mobile is here to the rescue with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with a high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan, so you can bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/made. That's mintmobile.com/made. Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months. 5 gigabyte plans required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees are extra. See Mint Mobile for details. We had Allie Krieger on not too long ago, and it was really interesting to hear how hard it was for her to come out. She did have a big fear about losing sponsorships and it really heavily affecting her career.
Yeah. Well, there's so many athletes still who, a lot more on the men's side probably than the women's side, who feel that way. But I think it really is a world where when you really pull it all the way back to like youth sports, you start to see how deeply embedded the messaging is. Especially in women's soccer, where male coaches are like the default. And a lot of that then, and a lot of those male coaches then are heterosexual. And so it's like, it ends up becoming a world where like you're just reflecting back you are getting reflected back at you, like what is right and good and who are the positions of authority. So, I think the key thing with women's sports historically, and like now queer athletes coming out of it, is that like, sorry to go like back in the history of it, but like the simple fact that women could play organized sports felt like a win. And it felt like we can't fuck this up. So, and you like that history and lineage pulls directly into the present. And maybe not the 2025 present, but certainly like some of our icons who really were coming of age in the 90s and the 2000s and then making these decisions to come out in like, 2017, 2018. Like you were talking about them growing up in a world where a lot of these, especially these WNBA players, were like, we have a league. You want to have a league and be queer? Get the fuck out.
Yeah.
Come on now. We have a league. And like that is what the pressure of like our society does on women's sports is like. And so when you're coming out of that, you're just like, well, I don't want to be the one who like turns the fans away. Like, I don't want to be the one who rocks the boat. And so like all of that, you just like deeply, deeply feel it and know it. And especially if you're at a level like an Ali Krieger or like a famous hockey player, and like you feel like you have the weight of like carrying, and a lot of these U.S. women's national team players or WNBA players, like they have the weight of not just carrying like their own self, but like they want to perpetuate leagues that have not been allowed to exist.
Yeah.
And nobody in our culture is telling, well, the way to do that is to be a big old lesbian.
Right.
You know what? You know what parents love and like advertisers love? I mean, maybe more so now, but like, and I think all of that is just like, it's deep on female athletes.
I mean, I think this is just what society does to women in general.
Yeah.
We're always just fighting for the scraps. And then when you're in the room, it's like, okay, I'm here. I cannot fuck this up. I can't be who I actually am because will they actually want me here?
Yep.
But I think it's like, and it sounds like the only way to fight back against that is for people to stand up and like say, this is who the fuck I am.
Yes.
And so other people can see that. I mean, it's just this snowball.
Yeah. And that's kind of the moment we're at right now where women, well, the whole culture, but where you're like, I'd imagine if you were growing up now, excluding like a place like Texas, where like you have a bubble where you're getting a lot of different messaging, but and you love women's soccer, I would think you're getting some messaging inside yourself that like, maybe who I am is going to be okay.
Yeah.
But that is all so young that you can't assume it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's scary to think that it's so young in the time we're at now.
Yeah, you're talking like, how long have we felt that way? 3 to 5 years, right? Where you'd say, I mean, maybe a little bit older, but like where you're like, cool, no big deal.
Yeah.
At least in most worlds.
Right.
That's not like a long time for that to really take hold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to hear a little bit about like also what it was like existing in the ESPN world and all of that closeted, just like what that day to day, did you feel the two closets thing?
Oh yeah.
Like
yeah.
what, were you dating women secretly?
Sure.
Okay. What was happening?
It was really, yes, I didn't literally have the two closets, but I had 1, 2, 3, like 4 jobs before I came out.
Okay.
And they affected them, and me being professionally closeted affected them in various ways. Like key ones just being with colleagues.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really get close to colleagues.
Yeah.
And then it was challenge. It was less about being gay, but when you're a reporter and you're unwilling to go out for drinks for various reasons, it's harder to get news and be connected to sources and players and people and everything, because you're limiting your social engagements because you've got like a lot of concerns.
Yeah.
One is like, it's hard to go out for a drink with somebody and not talk about something personal.
Yeah.
And I would rather not go to the drink than lie. And then there's also just like going out to drinks with men where you're like, I just don't want to be in that position.
Sure.
Whereas if you're out, I could more easily go out for a drink. But if they don't know, then you're confused about what you're saying to them. So all of that impacted my professional life for a decade plus. And then at ESPN, by the time I got to ESPN, I'd already met my mentor, lesbian icon. But I wasn't out in the beginning. And I would say that I was unwilling to actually write about the things I care about. I was at ESPN and I just kind of wanted them to let me write like a LeBron James profile. And I didn't want to write about women's sports because who fucking cares about them? You know, like I've already heard that it's not cool and I've got all my internal feelings. And I'm like, so I just wanted to find myself over here with like where the cool kids are.
Yeah.
And
that's
so that
kind of
was
what
all
I was
happening.
wondering. Like if you can't show who you really are and what you're really passionate about, then it's hard in that world where that's your lens, that's your POV, that's what matters.
You don't have a voice then.
Yeah.
You know? And so not thankfully, but up until then I was kind of more writing game coverage. So I could bring a different perspective and I didn't need as strong of a voice. But then when I started to do more profiles or columns, that was when I realized that I really only had something to say about women's sports and queer culture. And that was when I started to find how I wanted to transmit my certain perspective about the world. But it all came after my little ESPN epiphany. Yeah.
Is that when you shifted into more writing your novels?
No, I mean, so I had about maybe 6 years at ESPN where I was out, but I was writing more, like I was trying to write more coverage about women. Or at that time, after, like I said, the Michael Sam NFL stuff, there was also an NBA player who came out, and then there was like the Caitlyn Jenner. She had just transitioned, and they gave her an ESPY, and I was trying to write more coverage about trans issues in sports because it hadn't become a wedge issue for the political movements yet, and it looked like a thing that like was going to be progress.
Yeah.
And that was tough only because at ESPN or anywhere, I think what had started to happen was like I would pitch a story, say on a trans issue in sports or like a profile I want to write about somebody who happened to be gay, and I would get rejected and denied the ability to write the story because it would be like, we need to be an unbiased news organization. And I was like, well, it's an odd thing that all of your white cisgender men covering baseball are covering white cisgender men. Like they seem a little biased to me, perpetuating that.
Right.
But I didn't have that language right then, you know?
Yeah.
I was just frustrated.
Yeah.
I was frustrated that I could, like, so then you're going to have somebody write that story who does not have a voice on that?
Right.
Was a challenge. But I also, like, from a journalistic perspective, I was also like, well, I guess? I don't know. Is that right? Should I not be writing about these things because I understand them? Like, I couldn't quite, like, wrap my head around the logic of that.
Do you feel like some of that changed as time went on, or do you feel like that got worse because those issues became more divisive?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of wish I was still writing about them because I remember doing pieces on like Caster Semenya, South African runner. She runs the 800 and she is not trans, but because they were sex testing her in the Olympics, I would write stuff about just sex testing in sports, about these different issues. And it kind of got to a point where you started to realize like no one was changing. Like people were so dug in on this issue that it felt impossible to write about because just people's really deep feelings about gender, like whenever, like gender to me is like, if you fuck with anything having to do with gender, people don't know how to react.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, especially in sports, because men just can't deal with anything that they think takes away their, you know, the perceived masculinity that has been rubber stamped by them, by the sports world.
And like what they've owned for so long,
Yeah.
or like gate kept, I guess,
Yeah.
for so long.
Yeah, because I mean that's part of the women's sports issue is that all the gatekeepers are still men. So it's like, even if I told you that half of the women in coaching in 2010 were gay, why weren't they out? It was like, well, because every single AD, 93% of ADs were white men.
Right.
Athletic directors, sorry.
Yeah.
So
You had to please them.
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it didn't matter that your colleagues that you had a community or you could have been unionized in a queer way, in like a metaphorical queer way. It was like people with the purchasing power were your recruits' parents and then also athletic directors. So it was a kind of all trickle down, all in the sports world. Yeah.
That's interesting because I feel like we're moving into a place where things are going to regress, in that way.
Yeah.
But women's sports is really, really growing. So again, there's like this interesting imbalance. What do you foresee, or what do you think about that?
Well, barring us kind of properly organizing in America and like figuring out a way to rip out fascism by its roots, outside of that happening,
Correct.
let's assume we can't do that.
Right.
Because don't know how. You're already seeing the gender performance of female athletes being criticized. Like there's players in the NWSL currently who are not trans, but just are performing gender differently than how people want to see gender performed. And they're getting targeted. So the way I see that playing out, and these are conversations I was having years ago, was like, if we don't stand up and stop what's happening with trans people, all women will be affected by it. And it will happen first in sports because that was the place where they felt like they could just dig that issue and being like, I don't want men playing women's sports. Like that was a thing that they saw was sticking. But the ramification for all women in women's sports now is that like the slight amount of freedom we were starting to get of like, maybe I don't need a ponytail. Like pay attention to college sports and how few of those players don't have a ponytail. I mean, it's just like, especially white players, almost negligible.
Wow.
And like whatever slight gains we were starting to make to combat the climate we were talking about from, the 80s, 90s, 2000s, gone.
Yeah.
Unless we figure this out soon, because that's how it's they're going to start sex testing. And what do you think that's going to be based on? It's going to be based on your gender, performance, and race,
Right.
too.
Yeah.
So like all that stuff is really going to deeply impact women's sports. That doesn't mean it's not going to grow. It just means that the women within it are going to have to perform their gender in a specific way.
Right. Because a lot of that is based deeply on bias that you're already coming into it with.
Yeah, because if the goal is to get all trans people out of sports, then you're going to start sex testing people, then like female athletes are going to start showing and presenting themselves as not somebody. And I understand that if you're a kid growing up in that world and seeing that, you're going to start reflecting your own gender performance and what that pressure is telling you to be and look like.
Right. Of course. We're just moving backward in representation, and it's going to present a lot of people who felt exactly the way you did.
Yeah.
I've been learning a lot about sports lately.
Especially
right now. I mean, this is so helpful. But because I mentioned to you that we are wanting to, Made It Out is wanting to branch into sports. So a lot of my mind I've just been absorbing. And I have learned that, especially in WNBA, the ratings with women have been higher, double that of the men in the last couple of years. Don't quote me on the double. I don't know. But just higher. That's the point. And I'm curious to know your opinions on why this sudden interest in women's sports.
Okay. We're going to go nitty gritty here.
Okay, let's go.
Okay. So I think one huge thing is COVID. So when COVID happened and the NBA goes into their bubble and the WNBA ends up playing their season in the wubble, because that's what we do. But so they're all playing in that season is in a bubble.
Okay.
And up until then, the only the network that was airing the WNBA in particular, we'll stay there, was ESPN. In the early days, it was NBC, Lifetime, but that doesn't matter. Like ESPN has had the WNBA rights for like 20 years. And they mostly have the rights as a toss-in for the NBA rights. So they're not that interested in the WNBA rights up until this moment. It's just like a thing that they buy so that the NBA will sell them their TV rights.
Got it.
So then they have the WNBA rights, but then they don't put them on the air. So they own them all. And then they'll put them on ESPN too. And just for a little background, when I was on ESPN, if a host show moved to ESPN2, some of them wouldn't host the show. They would take the day off. Oh. That's how drastic the viewership drop off is.
Yeah.
So they might be putting, this is not a direct number, but pre-COVID, best case scenario, they're putting 17 games on the WNBA. And that's not like of the 30 games that a single team plays. I'm talking about 17 games out of 30 times all of the teams, right? So you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of games. They're going to put 17 on the air.
Wow.
COVID happens. It's the bubble season for the WNBA. No other sports are happening. So ESPN comes out with its schedule. And again, I'm kind of making up this number, but it's double the amount of games. They're going to put 35 games on the air. And what women, like everybody in the WNBA or anybody who cares about women's sports has been saying for decades was like, it's like a field of dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. It's like, put us on the air and then people will see us on the air and then they'll watch the next game that's on the air.
Yeah.
So now we're in COVID in the bubble season. There's no other sports, and they put 34 games on air. And now people are like, well, I caught that game, and now there's another game, and now I'm invested, and now the ratings go up. And the ratings go up that year. And so the next year, we're like, everybody in the WNBA is like, did you see what happened when you put more games on air?
Yep.
And now you've established a precedent that if you put 34 games on air, like the ratings will be better.
Right.
So there's that piece of it. So then ESPN's pressured and they keep putting more and more games on the air. The other key thing is that like sports coverage is not about the game itself. The reason you watch anything is because of the storylines of it.
Yeah.
You know, and the way ESPN will tell you a story about men's sports, you're going to know, right? You know who's beefing, right? You know, you pass a game and you're like, oh, it's LeBron versus Steph. Like, you just know these things.
Yeah.
And they do all of that because they have pregame shows and postgame shows.
Yep.
What do you think happens with women's sports? They basically are airing like bowling up until like 6:59, and then 7 comes on and they're like, today's and the voices too. It'd be like, today's the Sparks versus the Storm. Like, there's just like, it's the way you present it. It's the content you put around it. It's the number of games you air. So post-COVID, everything goes on the air more, and it's just like, oh, holy shit.
Yeah.
And that's coinciding with Caitlin Clark at Iowa, which is a college player. Mm-hmm. And like, there's a lot of history there. Like, so Iowa has a huge history of women's sports going back to like the 1930s and 40s and 50s. Like, there is a wonderful story from like, I think it was like 1920 something, where they canceled girls high school basketball in Iowa. They were just like, girls should not be playing this. They shouldn't sweat. They shouldn't move. We're canceling basketball in Iowa. And one guy, bless him, stands up and he's like, you're wrong to do that. Like, this is like a train in forward motion, and we are going to continue it. Mm. And so he saved women's basketball in Iowa, and the history of women's basketball in Iowa, high school level. Like, their state championships get 10,000, 12,000 people. And this is in the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s. So when Caitlin Clark decides to play in Iowa and not go to UConn, and I think if she goes to UConn, she gets the UConn treatment, which is its own thing, right? Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, Tamika, you know, like, you've got that lineage, and it creates media attention, but it's a certain kind of media attention. And we've seen it before. But she stays in Iowa, where people are obsessed with women's basketball. Mm. And so now ESPN's like, holy shit, there's this white girl in Iowa, and it's like 15,000 people a game, and Iowa's exploding. And you know, and there's a little bit of like, now we've got like the safe white girl vibe. Mm. And the last thing I'll say, like, so I think those two things collided. And then the last thing I'll say just about where I think we are, and I've kind of gone basketball heavy here, but I think it applies everywhere, is that like the main thing women's sports is never able to have, because it's just hard enough being a female athlete, is like, we just don't have villains. You know, like men's sports, you always have a villain. Like, you got your little Dennis Rodman, you know, or you just know a villain because you know all the storylines. So somebody is a villain to you.
Yeah.
Whereas like in women's sports, the way we tell stories, it's either like you're a mother or you're Mary Lou Retton and you're like so nice.
Yeah.
And who would want to be a villain in women's sports? Like, you just wouldn't. Right. Until you got like Angel Reese at LSU, who ends up talking smack to Caitlin Clark. And now you've got like your Larry Bird, Mary Magic Johnson moment from the 70s, where it's kind of about race, but it's kind of about culture. And now America's paying attention.
Yeah, so true. Because even though I know those references.
And that's all about villain versus hero. And now how America sees who the villain is and who the hero is its a whole other question.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's kind of my explanation.
Can you talk to some of the inequalities in men and women's sports that you've seen over time?
Yeah, I think maybe the best way to kind of highlight beyond the obvious things, right? Mm-hmm. There's kind of at least obvious to me now, is like the numbers of like 4% of, you know, ESPN Sports Center is talking about women's sports. You know,
4%
the things that,
is crazy.
It'll be like slightly higher in a women's World Cup year, you know? So like those things are kind of perpetual. Mm-hmm. But I think the thing that people, just a commonplace knee-jerk reaction people don't understand when they're like, they use the capitalistic argument, which is like, well, men's sports make money. They don't really understand the baked-in inequality. Like, for example, like TV contracts. Like, women's TV contracts are almost never allowed to go to market on their own merit. Like, they're baked in with men's, right? So like the NCAA women's basketball tournament is part of an NCAA conference purchase by ESPN. And so people will historically, and I always lean a little basketball here because I know more about it, but a lot of these things apply to like women's soccer, less so to solo sports. But like for like the NCAA women's tournament, people would always say year after year, it loses money, it loses money, it loses money. And yet you're like, but you sold it in a package with everything. Right. So ESPN is just, and I'm making up this number, but like, we'll pay you $5 million a year for all of your NCAA women's sports, like gymnastics to everything. Whereas on the men's side, they separate out men's basketball and they sell it for $1 bazillion to CBS.
Right.
And now nobody is saying that if you separated out women's basketball separate from all of women's championships, that it would make $1 bazillion. But I am saying that like, instead of it, being a few $1,000,000, you'd get triple that.
Right.
And then you could stop saying it didn't make money.
Right. That data is a little skewed.
And like everywhere you look, it's skewed. Like even on the WNBA level, they haven't historically been able to take out, let's say, like who's our soft drink sponsor going to be? It's just like, oh, Pepsi bought the NBA and you're also going to have Pepsi. But it's like, but what if we went to market and we found a brand and like but the thing historically has always been like, nobody cared enough to do that. They were like, oh, whatever, we got pennies on the dollar for it, better than nothing, because it's all nothing in our minds. It's just mostly men just saying, just throw it in. Give us an extra, $500K and we'll just toss the WNBA in with it. Whereas if somebody separately were pulling it out, thinking about who to market to, you could get triple that or more, like all of that. So like rinse and repeat everywhere you go. Thus then leading to like lack of media coverage because who cares? Because nobody buys it, because like this thing is just like a self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah.
That we truly are kind of breaking out of.
How do we further break out of it, and how does the community support?
Yeah. So I think the idea of purchasing power is like the key thing when it comes to women's sports. Like, I think it's the thing we're talking a lot about now with our politics. You're like, well, vote with your dollar.
Yeah.
You're like, don't go to Amazon right now. And like, if you don't have to pay a ton of attention to women's sports. Like, you don't need to be sitting around watching the WNBA to support the WNBA. You can do one thing, which is like, or let's take the NWSL, just to get a little women's soccer in here. There's a bank, Ally. And they just like bought into the NWSL years ago. They were like, you know what? We care about this. And we are going to give equally our sponsorship dollars that we use to promote, like we're going to advertise with sports. We're going to give as much to women's sports as we are to men. And they did that years ago. And so like bank with Ally, like if you can, like you don't need to love going to games. Like I'm not a huge go to a game. They're just little ways where you're like, oh, Dick's Sporting Goods, they're very good to women's sports. Like, go order a pair of sneakers from them if you need a pair of sneakers.
Yeah.
Like, just reinforce the fact that like there are certain brands that have been great to women's sports, especially over the last decade. And like, just supporting those brands goes a long way to making them continue to make that decision.
Yeah.
To continue to invest in women's sports.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've learned so much today.
Awesome.
But you're not going to get off my couch without getting a little deep, because that's my area of expertise.
Yeah.
So I ask everybody this question. It's, what are you working on in therapy?
Okay. So for a little while, I was working on figuring out which drug would fix everything without me doing any work.
Yeah.
That operation seems to have failed.
Okay.
And then Holly and I were talking on the way over here, and I think this is the project now, is like trying to figure out what ways my trauma is manifesting in anxiety. Because I think I've always separated the two. Or I just don't label things trauma.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I do think trauma can feel like, well, who was murdered in front of you vibe.
Sure. It's like a really big word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not, I saw this SNL skit and my dad used the word dyke. Like, just doesn't feel like it's enough.
Totally. So
I think trying to understand how my own overthinking and anxiety might be from trauma, and going back to that, because I haven't found the magic pill, sadly.
Yeah, neither have I.
Damn. Okay, but are you sure?
Lexapro really has helped.
Okay.
But it's with like a fuck ton of therapy and inner child work.
Also with the talk therapy?
Yes. And like meditation and like journaling.
Oh, I'm big on the breath work now.
You are?
Oh, yeah. I don't get money from this app called Othership, but I love them.
Othership. Okay.
Othership. And it's not like breath work, like, oh, I'm just going to take a deep inhale and a deep exhale for like 10 minutes. And like, it's not a form of meditation. It's like 45 minutes of rapid breathing.
Yeah.
Like where you go to a psychedelic different place. Like I love doing that.
Yeah. It's kind of like you make yourself almost like you're having like kind of like a panic attack or like a
calm panic attack.
Yeah. It's like, but you're bringing yourself to that place of like the healing and of the panic attack isn't the right word. It's like hyperventilation or something. Yeah. Yep. Breath work is magical.
It is.
But yeah, you do have to pair it with.
You can't just do the breath work.
Because I was going to ask, how do you do that? How are you, now you're recognizing or you're trying to pair the trauma and then what?
I don't know. This literally just started today.
Yeah. Okay. So, oh my gosh. Good. Okay. I can't wait to hear about it.
I'll report back.
We play a game. It's called You Haul or You Ghost.
Oh, okay.
I know you're happily married, but just pretend.
Yeah. Let's go for it anyway.
Yeah.
I'll live in my imagination.
Yes. Perfect in every way except for this one like quirk. Okay. They paint their face whenever you go to a sporting event.
Like, U-Haul. Yes. Yeah, and the enthusiasm for the sports, I'm into.
You're into it.
Yeah, like my own wife, although that's like when I got her into soccer and we would go to the World Cup and she was super into it and taking video, like just the amount of pride I feel in her joy. So if somebody were already into it, that would be like immediate.
You're into it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
For me, as a non-sports gay, I'd be like, wow, I think this is a lot.
Yeah. Well, you said painting the face, which to me was better than like if I were straight and the guy were wearing a jersey, that's a no-go.
Oh my gosh. Wait, let's unpack that. Why?
I just think there's something like really subversive about a woman who loves sports, especially because when you said painting face, like I was picturing a women's sports event.
Right.
So it just all felt like embracing a sense of like community, and which I don't associate with men's sports. I just associate that with like anger a lot of times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's so fascinating.
So that would be a you.
In that way, I'm like, okay, wait, you haul. I kind of like it.
Right.
It's like pride.
So the follow-up is like, have they painted their face for a women's sporting event?
Yes. Okay. All right. What about, okay, you're into the sports thing.
Right.
But what about if they work sports analogies into every single conversation?
Yeah. That is a ghost. That is a you ghost. Yeah.
It's like, what are you trying to prove?
There's not as many of the sports metaphors that are like really compelling and nuanced. You know?
Yeah.
There's just not that many of them. So I assume that I'd be hearing some cliches.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
Again.
I have one more for you.
Okay.
Their dog has an obscene name. Like asshole. Or like pussy.
Oh, okay, like actually obscene.
Like obscene. And like you can't, you're not nicknaming your way out of this.
Right. No, that's a you ghost. Yeah. What about you for that one?
I kind of think it's funny.
Okay.
I'm kind of like, okay, our dog's name is Pussy. That's funny. Whatever.
Yeah. It sets up a repeated sort of interaction in your life though that maybe you want to get away from.
Okay, that might be true.
That just feels like it might become overwhelming after a while. If it were Pussy or something like that.
Can you imagine like you're at the dog park?
Right.
Yeah.
Like think about, actually, I mean, this is almost like going, like, you know, when you are trying to figure out if you're coming out and like people ask, oh, well, is your boyfriend coming or something like that? And then you have every time at the dog park, when they say, well, what's your dog's name? You're kind of having a little mini interaction in your head about how to communicate. Yeah.
Funny in the moment, long term,
not
bad. Fucking funny.
Yeah. Not fucking funny.
If you're thinking about doing this, bad idea.
Yeah.
We just went down the road for you. Okay, thank you for playing. Yeah. Can you tell people where to find you, where to find your book?
Yeah, so the book is The 3 Lives of KK, and get it wherever you get your books, hopefully an independent bookstore. And then I'm on Instagram for now at Kate Fagan 3.
For now?
I don't know. I mean, it's meta. It's all like,
that's fair.
Yeah, I'm a little worried the algorithm is making me sick. You know, that whole song and dance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all for listening to today's episode. As always, help us spread the gay agenda by writing an Apple review, rating us on Spotify, and sharing with everyone you've ever met. And if you haven't yet, join our subscription community, Made It In, for exclusive Made It Out media shows, content, and chat rooms at madeitout.supercast.com. Made It Out is produced by Matilde Jordan and worked on solely by lesbians.
She writes, then she plays, spinning words and crossing lanes. Both courts call her home.